Welcome to the Creative Penn podcast. I'm Joanna Penn, thriller author and creative entrepreneur, bringing you interviews, inspiration and information on writing, publishing options and marketing ideas for your book. You can find the episode show notes, your free author blueprint and lots more information at thecreativepenn.com, and that's Penn with a double N. And here's the show. Hello creatives, I'm Joanna Penn, and this is episode number 561 of the podcast, and it is Friday the 9th of July 2021 as I record this. In today's show, I'm talking to Scottish author Ed James on writing crime fiction and some of the important elements of the genre, as well as how his publishing choices have evolved over time, why he had to reboot his book marketing and how he did it, and how his engineering background helped him become a better writer. And of course, Ed is Scottish, so you get to listen to his lovely accent. So that's coming up in the interview section. In publishing news, well, Jeff Bezos has stepped down as CEO of Amazon last week and Andy Jassy stepped in. So Jeff is remaining as executive chair, but he's focusing on Blue Origin, his space venture, which he's always said has been his focus since childhood. In fact, he apparently became the richest man in the world in order to go to space. I mean, you got to hand it to him. He's very driven. In fact, he's off to space next week as this goes out. And this is speculation, of course, but I think it's possible that the board probably said to him, you know, Jeff, you can't be CEO of Amazon and blast into space because there's risk involved in putting the CEO of Amazon on a rocket. But now the company is in safe hands. He can blast off without impacting the stock price if anything happens. That is just my supposition. What is quite awesome, I think, and this does relate to the entertainment industry, is that Jeff is taking Wally Funk with him. She's 82 and was part of the Mercury 13, the women who did all the NASA training in the early 60s but were not allowed to go to space. And I learned about them on the Apple TV show For All Mankind, which, by the way, is excellent. It's one of these alternative history, and it feels kind of slow-paced, but essentially Russia gets a man and then a woman on the moon first before the US, and then it's sort of tracking NASA and space exploration since that point in an alternative history. And I find alternative history programs really fascinating, especially as they sort of put in historical footage and things. And those women in this alternative history, they are the pilots and they do go to space, and or at least some of them do. So yeah, I thought that was really cool, and I wouldn't have known about that other than watching the Apple TV show For All Mankind. And I did also want to mention that probably 7-8 years ago now, and I've had Dan Sawyer on the show a couple of times. Dan is an audio guy from way back, and we were talking about world English rights, and we were laughing about off-world rights, because at the moment world English rights is what's in most contracts, for example, or something specifying world or specific territories. But then the question became, well, what about off-world rights? Because if people start commuting through space, I say commuting, I mean, or space tourism or whatever, they're going to need some in-flight entertainment. And so who's going to license sort of off-world rights, and what does that mean? And we had thought maybe that wouldn't happen in our lifetime. But again, I'm 46 and Jeff's going to space now, and there's going to be lots more space tourism. So I thought that was interesting to mention, like, don't write off the possibility of things changing. And even a basic contract term like world English is possibly now going to need an amendment for off-world. I love this stuff, I really do. Anyway, back to Amazon. Andy Jassy, the new CEO, joined Amazon in 1997 and led and pretty much built AWS. Now, I use AWS for hosting of files and things, and their cloud hosting runs a lot of the internet. But if you go to the AWS homepage, you'll now see how much more it has become. It's AI as a service, it's blockchain, Internet of Things, quantum computing, robotics, VR, and a ton of other stuff. If you go there, you'll see the breadth of what that business does. And I think this is very interesting because, of course, we've got these bills going through Congress discussing regulation and potentially breakup of big tech in some ways. And although the message is business as usual at Amazon, I would expect changes in the next year because, as a company in control of its destiny, I believe Amazon will make changes to its own company before someone forces them to do it. So, I'm putting together this futurist update at the moment. As ever, it's ever expanding. Last time it turned into a book, but I'm hoping that's not what it's going to do. But that's going to be coming probably in the next few weeks. Also, in the hot sheet, Jane Friedman reports on a conversation hosted by the Authors Guild with Penguin Random House CEO Marcus Dole. He talked about why this is the best time ever in publishing, which I can certainly agree with, including the fact that the global book market is growing every year. Note, global book market, so yes, across the world. People are spending more money on books than before, industry revenue is growing, and there is a stable, robust business model for both physical distribution and digital distribution, and a healthy coexistence between physical and digital formats. I definitely would put my hand up around the stable, robust business model because I think this is being disrupted, which is part of the thing I'm working on. I think in the next 2 years, the stable business model will be disrupted even more. Anyway, he said, most recently, the pandemic has only made the situation better with sales up in all categories and print sales strong. And of course, this is print sales online, which is why many indie authors have done pretty well during the pandemic, have had a good year in terms of sales and growth because of the pandemic. And it is a silver lining to what is still a difficult time. Certainly, it still feels like some days it just still feels like we're right in it here in the UK, for sure. He also says the shift to online retail, 50% before pandemic, 70% during the pandemic. So that's 70% of books bought online, basically, has resulted in sales across a larger number of titles. As Chris Anderson predicted more than 10 years ago in his book, The Long Tail, the digital age has indeed brought a long tail of sales to the industry. The bestseller business is under pressure, which is a challenge for publishing houses. And of course, we've talked about this, indies do exist in the long tail. We don't have a bestseller business, really. We don't. Some people focus on launches, but most of us are happy selling many more books in the backlist. When questioned on why many authors are not making much money, if publishing is booming, and this is particularly, obviously this is Marcus talking. He says 50% of the books published by traditional publishers never break even. And I thought that was really fascinating. 50% of books published by traditional publishers never break even. So if you're someone listening and you're like, oh, that book didn't work out so well, then don't worry, because it's the same in traditional publishing. The financial result is negative and it's a loss-making publication. When you're working in this industry, you need a high tolerance of frustration. Agents know that, authors know that. You fail often. But that failure is a good thing, Dole said. If we never fail, we don't publish enough. It's a creative business. It's a risky business. It's unpredictable. There is no formula. In essence, every book is a new creative entrepreneurial endeavour. So I thought that was fascinating. This is the CEO of Penguin Random House saying that 50% of books don't even break even. I don't even know. I mean, they have a lot of multiple streams of income publishers. But yeah, I thought you might enjoy that. So, as ever, lots more in the hot sheet, which is a paid newsletter by Jane Friedman, and it's a very reasonable price and you get it every 2 weeks. I subscribe, definitely recommend it if you're interested in staying up to date with what's going on in the publishing industry in both the traditional side, the indie side. Just go to hotsheetpub.com to check out one of the newsletters and subscribe. Also, Mike Shatskin, publishing expert and commentator, has a blog post this week on basically enterprise book publishing. So he says, it increasingly looks to me like enterprise-driven book publishing will become the dominant provider of books over the next decade. What distinguishes it is book publishing as a function in support of other efforts rather than as a standalone business intending to make money. So I was reading this going, again, I feel like this is something that's been going on a long time, but maybe this is an expansion. But this is no surprise to us, I think. Many non-fiction authors publish as lead generation into their more lucrative businesses, and many top non-fiction bloggers, speakers, coaches have been doing this for years. Or, for example, one example of this is my free ebook, Successful Self-Publishing, which I keep updated. That's a free ebook, but it earns me quite a lot of money through affiliate income, through links to services and products. And of course, there's a declaration in there that there are affiliate links, but I recommend services and products I trust. And so that free book brings in, and it is available in print, but that free book or cheap print book brings in much more money through other ways than it does through sales. And this is a model that non-fiction bloggers and speakers and coaches have been doing for years. Now, I think Mike has sort of expanded this definition into any business that is using content creation as marketing: accountants, real estate agencies, any businesses. Noting the distance between publishing a blog and publishing a book is literally vanishingly small. And it's funny he says that, because I hate the fast blog to book idea. There were some apps earlier, probably still some apps, where you could just press a button and output your blog into book format. And I think content in a book is different to that on a blog. And I often do it the other way around. So I have many articles on the Creative Penn that are chapters from books that I've written and published that I then put onto the blog. I don't think it goes the other way, because content you write specifically for a blog is quite different to that you put in a book. But I do agree that books are becoming more common amongst companies that want to present their material in book format and don't need a publisher to do that, or they're basically their own publisher. As Mike says, bookstores don't sell most of the books. More than half books are sold through online discovery and ordering, which means there is no more protected space for dedicated publishers. So what does this mean for us? Well, it's not news that publishing a book is not a special thing. Publishing is not story-worthy. We have a lot of books in the world, but as ever, it's about doubling down on being you and sharing your particular angle on whatever you're writing about, your story, your take on a romance or a thriller. Why would someone buy my little book on the future of publishing when they could buy a book from Wired? Well, it's my take on the topic. It's my personal angle. So the book is not the unique or special thing. You are. And I think that's so important for us to remember. In my personal update, I've had a good week between my two writing projects. I go to the co-working space down in Bath in the morning to write Tomb of Relics, my next arcane thriller, which I'm just having fun with, to be honest. I'm just indulging all my weirdness. And then I come back to the house to do some work on The Relaxed Author, and which I'm co-writing with Mark Leslie Lefebvre, and also other business and life things. And it's working well because the different location helps me move between my different brains as JF Penn in the morning and Joanna Penn later in the day. And I just like keeping the two separate. I find having that different physical space helps a lot. And so that's good. Also, if you enjoyed the show last week with Jen Stevens, we briefly talked about intermittent fasting, but I go into a lot more detail about my own practice, I guess, in an interview on her podcast, Intermittent Fasting Stories, which I'm in episode 155. So just look for Intermittent Fasting Stories on your favourite podcast app, and it's episode 155. You'll hear about me and Jonathan and how IF has really helped us in the last year. Also, impersonal things and useful stuff, hopefully, as a celebration of direct sales. And I'm doing 50% off all my courses and my direct sale of audiobooks and ebooks for the month of July 2021. Just use coupon July21, all caps, at checkout for 50% off at thecreativepenn.com/learn for my courses and payhip.com/thecreativepenn for ebooks and audiobooks. Links in the show notes. Coupon July 21. And thanks to everyone who's been buying books and courses this week. I just love having the direct ability to do this. I like having this coupon thing to do special deals for my audience. So yeah, I really love that. Okay, thanks to all your emails and tweets and comments this week. Dharma says, listening to the latest show while making latte art at home. A little skill I learned during lockdown. Lovely pictures of coffee, which is great. Elena said, this was a great interview, as was the one of you on Jin's show. I like how you included your husband's journey and your moderate, slow approach to intermittent fasting, which makes it look more feasible long term. And yeah, to me, it is just the way, it's a way of eating. Like, it's not a diet, it's a way of eating. Anthony commented on YouTube on the pseudo-write interview with Ahmet, says, I am a writer with a background in graphic design. Early in my design career, I recall people wondering if computer art was going to stick around and suggested that using Photoshop was cheating. Today we recognise that drawing on a tablet is more efficient drawing, and you can't just push a button and have it create a masterpiece. I believe AI writing tools like pseudo-write will be seen the same way one day. Totally agree, Anthony, and I love using pseudo-write as part of my writing process now. Right, so today's show is sponsored by Ingram Spark. I use Ingram Spark to print and distribute my self-published print books wide, because with Ingram Spark, it's my content. They help me do more with it. So why even consider Ingram Spark? Well, if you only use KDP Print, bookstores, libraries, universities and print-on-demand sites in many countries will not consider your book because you need to offer a discount, and also you need to be in the catalogues that many of those services use. So if you care about getting your book into bookstores, libraries, etc., you need to go wide with your print books. And remember, even if you're exclusive with your ebooks, you can go wide with print and or audio, and so you can still do wide printing with Ingram Spark. You will have access to over 40,000 retailers through independent bookstores, libraries, schools and universities, chain bookstores and more across a global network of distributors, including bookstores like Foyles, Blackwell's and Waterstones in the UK. And I've seen my books in Blackwell's and Waterstones, which is cool, as well as bookshop.org, which has become very popular in the pandemic, Booktopia in Australia and New Zealand, Chapters Indigo in Canada, Walmart, Target and loads of independent bookstores in the U.S.A. Of course, and it means if a reader recommends that a library order your book, they'll be able to go onto their system and find it. Of course, it means your book will be available to order, but you will still have to drive demand. But since having my books on Ingram Spark, I've had pictures of my print books in libraries. I've sold them at book fairs, conventions, and in physical stores. And my revenue, income from Ingram Spark has grown over the past couple of years, which I shared on my book sales report the other week. You can choose to use returns, but it's not necessary, and I don't do returns, and you can choose your discount percentage. You can also bulk order. So for example, if you're speaking at an event or you work direct with schools or even bookstores, I've had several bookstores order direct from me, and then I just go onto Ingram, order a box of books and ship them to the location. All works very well. So it's your content, do more with it. Head over to ingramspark.com. So this type of corporate sponsorship pays for the hosting, transcription and editing, but my time is sponsored by my wonderful patrons, and especially the in-between-episodes, more of which to come. Thanks to new patrons this week, Ashley Rescott, Shannon Sullivan, Peter de Tagios and Rob Johnson. And thanks to everyone supporting the show on Patreon. Your support means so much to me and helps me know and understand that this show is still useful, and in the days when I feel like stopping, you guys keep me going. And Remember, if you sign up, you get the Q&A, a monthly Q&A where I answer your questions, and you also get the backlist. And Julie said, just wanted to express my deep appreciation for your backlist of Q&A podcasts. I'm just starting out on my indie publishing journey, and since I signed up on Patreon a few weeks ago, I've been working through the backlist. I'm back to September 2017 and have 20 pages of notes. Hugely useful and will prevent me making a lot of beginner's mistakes. So yes, you get lots of backlist audio if you join up on Patreon, patreon.com/thecreativepenn. And of course, you know, it is a monthly thing, but you can pop in and out as you like. Right, let's get into the interview. Ed James is a Scottish crime author with over 20 crime and thriller novels spanning 5 different series set across Edinburgh, Dundee, London and the Pacific Northwest of the USA. So welcome, Ed.
Hi, Joanna. It's good to catch up again after so long.
Yeah, indeed. And we see each other in person occasionally at events. But first up, tell us a bit more about you and how you got into writing.
So my sort of path to writing was I was looking for a creative outlet as I was growing up, and it used to be music, and I was in bands and so on and so forth. And then that all kind of sort of died a bit in about 2005. 6 time, and I was very angry about music and how much time is spent on it and a lot of other things. So I just started channeling my energies into writing, and over that next 4 years, it's a case of writing what people call practice novels, I suppose, over various genres, sending them off to agents, getting absolutely nothing other than maybe a few little leaflets back saying, yeah, no, thanks for sending this, it's not for us, kind of thing. And then I think about 2010, I finished the first Scott Cullen book and actually had some interest from agents there. And that's quite exciting because everyone I knew who'd been involved in writing had never even got that far. So it was like 3 months you wait when they send off the full manuscript, and then in another sort of form, not quite a form rejection, but just saying, yeah, it's not for us. And that was a bit dispiriting, and I kind of gave up writing about that point for about a year and a half. My day job got a bit hectic as well. And then I remember reading lots of stuff late 2011 about how the Kindle was taking off. And I thought, right, I've got that book. I think it's probably got a lot of potential. So I'll finish it, publish it, and see how it goes. And that took me a bit longer than expected because it needed a lot of work. So maybe the agents weren't so daft. But I think my dad did the copy editing and proofing for it. And I got it up in the middle of April 2012. And it took me quite a while to get any sales to come in. And that was like the start of, I suppose, I think you talk about the sort of flip of being an author to being the publisher, and it's understanding that side of it from absolutely no understanding of what publishers even did around editing or marketing, all that kind of stuff, and actually just having to get sort of a handle of marketing and then start to sell books. That was, in those days, you got a lot of stuff free from Amazon. I think it's fair to say they used to present your books to people, and that was always quite nice. Once you got enough traffic on, you get quite a lot of traction of that. So
that takes you up to 2012, 2013, and then what happened with your day job? You said you were working a day job back then.
Yeah, so around that time, I think I published 5 books in about a year, maybe. Yeah, a year and a half, and it sort of started creeping up to being quite a good monthly income. And at that point, I was working in London, and I was actually travelling from a home near Edinburgh every week on a 6:30 flight down to London in the morning, and then back up on Thursday night and working from home on Friday. And I was basically just either working or writing when I was down there, or occasionally seeing friends. And I started to get quite a bit of money coming in from having like a decent sort of start to a series, so 4 books in that, and a vampire thriller that didn't exactly set the world aflame. So that was it was more like I had a sort of back pain at the time. It was a really lower back problem, and I was struggling to actually work. So I had another contract in Edinburgh this time. And I lasted about 3 days because my back was so bad, and it must have been some sort of form of sick building syndrome. And I just sat from then, recovered a bit, and wrote, and the money kept coming in, rolling in, increasing. So and I haven't looked back since. That's now my 8th year, I think, full time. So it's been a pretty good ride, but a stressful one, I think it's fair to say.
That's a stressful one. Yeah, we'll come back to the publishing side, but I wanted to start with the genre side, because a lot of listeners, obviously we've got a lot of UK listeners, but we've also got a lot of Americans listening, people in other countries. And I feel like crime fiction has a really specific place in the UK market. It feels like it's a huge genre, and we have an appreciation, perhaps even the literary critics seem to have some appreciation of crime novels. So I wondered if you will maybe comment on why is it so big in the UK, and also what are the essential genre elements for a crime novel?
So I think there's definitely something in the discrepancy between Britain and America in terms of popularity of maybe like more the police procedural side of things, which I write. So I think in America, it's very hard to think of any police procedurals. There's probably only Michael Connelly's Bosch series that's a police procedural, and even then it's like a PI working in the police force, whereas a lot of the big books over there tend to be that sort of PI thing, which isn't really a sort of a genre over here, whereas we have a rich legacy going back to Morse and before, and all of big police procedural series, and a lot of it is, I think the television side of it picks up. You can think when growing up, there's lots of TV shows that we had are basically police procedural, Case of the Week, the long running, sort of quite cheesy mainstream ones like The Bill, which run every week, and every sort of jobbing actor would appear in. But that thing is probably like ingrained in our consciousness, and I think the police force here is different to America with all the sort of difficulties they've had over there. The roots of it are quite different. So police officers here tend to be seen directly more as absolute heroes, whereas in America it's maybe more of a murky grey area. I think there's definitely, I think it's really been really traditionally difficult for British police procedural authors to translate their success across the Atlantic. I remember Ian Rankin saying that it took him about 20 rebus books before he had a bestseller over there. And I think, his 8th one over here was like basically established that whole genre, but the stuff him and Val McDermid were doing at that time in the late 90s. It's rare for British authors to have that sort of success over there. There's someone like Ruth Ware, for instance, sells an absolute kiloton over there, but doesn't. That's her biggest market, and she writes very sort of British crime novels, maybe a bit more traditional, but with a modern twist on it, and they do colossally well in that neck of the woods. So it's an interesting one, and it's something I've definitely seen. I do sell a sort of an interesting number in America, like surprisingly so, but it's not that much bigger than what you'd sell in Canada or Australia. So maybe it's like an expat community or Anglophiles or whatever. And it was kind of like an interesting one that led me on to writing a sort of an FBI thriller set over in Seattle and the Pacific Northwest, which it was to sort of try and capture some of them, or just to see if I could sell books over there. But one of the things I've found with, I don't know, maybe it's particular to genre fiction, that the readers tend to be very intolerant of authors experimenting. I think they like the characters as much as they like the author, if that makes sense. So someone will be looking for a Reacher book or a Rebus book rather than a Lee Child or Ian Rankin book. And it's if you write something that's done by the same name, but it's a thriller set in America with American English, and it's not got, a couple of alcoholic cops wandering around Edinburgh. It's got a lot of chase scenes and so on. They don't seem to appreciate the difference. And I think that's one of the things I found with the vampire book, that it should have maybe been more of a warning sign back in the day, that writing it under the same author name, they didn't like the fact they just want police procedurals. That's what a lot of the reader feedback I got was. And it's quite hard when you've got that established brand to then break into other things.
I totally agree. And I tried, because I obviously being here in England and met you and a lot of crime authors at conferences, and sort of like, right, I'm going to write myself a proper crime novel with a detective and everything. And I attempted a police procedural and ended up with a sort of supernatural thriller hybrid. I just can't write anything that doesn't have supernatural in. And I discovered that these crime readers just wouldn't read it. They wouldn't pick it up, let alone, it just wasn't their thing. And that cross genre, as you say there, it just doesn't seem to work, particularly with a British crime audience. And I think you're right about America is a lot more sort of FBI thrillers than there are police procedurals as such. But if we accept that we're going to write a very pure crime novel, police procedural, so what are the main genre elements, the essential things that you need?
So I think the main thing that you want to focus on with a police procedural isn't so much necessarily the crime, but it's starting to like look at character, and I think that's probably true of any type of fiction, really. But I think with police procedural, it's very important. Like I was saying earlier, I think the reader's attached to the characters. So if you think about a long-running series, it's about people wanting to spend time with those characters. They become their friends. So I think the same with that's why podcasts are so important now and popular, because a lot of long running podcasts, it's like spending time with your friends. So thinking about and lots of TV shows like Friends and Cheers and all that kind of stuff, it's about that sort of that bond of friendship that the audience has with the creators. So a lot of the characters that do really well are making them interesting. So they don't have to be a kind of Superman type. Or too dark like Bruce Wayne type, but like an interesting character is kind of fresh and has an interesting spin on it. So I'd say the characters I've created, the Scott Cullen one is the one who tends to attach most to people, and he was started as a sort of the opposite of the tropes, where there's a middle-aged alcoholic who's drives a classic car and has a difficult relationship with his estranged daughter or whatever, all those things. It was inverting that and making him like a really sort of young cop who was idealistic and all those sort of things. So it made it interesting for me to write, and I could see sort of that it was kind of fresh, and it seems to have picked up on a lot. But the problem is a lot of the readers tend to be quite conservative in their views, not with a small c maybe rather than a capital C, but they would like, if you look at the bigger sellers, they do like a sort of patrician type, a steady hand on the till, so someone who's an authority figure rather than a wee daft idiot from Edinburgh running around. And so that's the sort of the main kind of thing, I think, is if you're looking at writing a police procedural series, is focusing on an interesting, unique character and someone that you want to write and you want to spend time with and that you think other people will. But also the other side of it is that I think the important thing is each novel in a book in the series should be not necessarily standalone, but that case should just cover that. So any new readers picking up book 8 or whatever can just get a contained story, and there's not too much heavy backstory they need to have read the first 7 to get up to speed on. But focusing on like the victims and the families and friends of the victims, making them interesting characters, showing their lives, because with a police procedural, it's kind of a reflective thing. So you're not necessarily seeing the victim alive and going through their day. You're investigating their life through a lens, and you're picking up lies and clues from the friend and family, and there's discrepancies, and that's where the detectives work at it. And they can throw in things like action scenes to spice it up a bit, but that's broadly what you're writing, is investigating someone's life and unpicking where it all went wrong, that someone to the point where someone killed them. And obviously you can extend that into the psychology of a serial killer, where you've got a very active threat against the police who are trying to solve the crime. A lot of police procedural books tend to be a single murder, which is much more believable to write, whereas a serial killer, there's hundreds of them in fiction and not so many in actual real life anymore.
It's interesting you say that, because I was thinking, like, I really write thrillers where things are much bigger, like the threat is much, much bigger. But as you say, I think a lot of the police procedural books, as you say, there might be one murder, and even though the stakes are high, they're not the destruction of humanity or millions of people dying. It can be quite I don't want to use small in a derogatory way, and it doesn't even have to be domestic, but it's a much tighter viewpoint, I guess, than having this grand epic thriller, which I guess a lot of people write.
Yeah, so I think that was one of my favourite books, which you never see mentioned, is was sort of craft books, is Secrets of Action Screenwriting by, I think it's William Martell. It's got one of the worst covers I've ever seen for a book, but it's like the interior is incredible and there's lots of dissection, and it's very applicable for any type of crime stuff or thrillers or anything like that. It was really good stuff. It's all about the psychology of the villains, but like you're saying, I think the thing he homes in on is the stakes. So they should be, they should either be personal or global, like you say, but like take it to the extreme. And I think, I think the police procedurals, it's not about, trying to save the president's life to avert a nuclear war or anything. It's about someone's life has collapsed, and, and the most extreme personal loss is someone's death. And then you can extend that with police procedurals and serial killers and get more of a threat to society and wider active part of it. But yeah, I think you're definitely right. The police procedurals tend to have much more of that sort of personal side of it than, your big conspiracies. That's not to say there's not a genre for conspiracy police procedurals.
Yeah, that's a good point. But I wanted to come back to your background, because you have you worked in process engineering, and I wondered how, because crime novels, mysteries, solving a crime, what you can't do is really make it easy for people to figure out. So how does your process engineering background influence your writing process and your plotting?
I think the thing I look at it is trying to make everything as efficient as possible. So that was what I was always doing in insurance companies and banks. It was like there's a process of someone, I don't know, changing an address or applying payments or refunding payments, and you're looking at it, documenting what they're doing, and you're understanding where they have the problem points. There's things that slow it all down. And it's kind of the same with writing. Where can I make this more efficient? And every time I write a book, I try to do something different to see if I can make it more efficient. And it's always like, just having that sort of flow chart. And it's actually not even something I've documented, but it's in my head. But it is, everything I do is like, it's all about process and flows of left to right. I think a novel, when you're reading it, is obviously left to right, but a lot of the stuff we write, thrillers or police procedurals, you can think about it, whether you're plotting or pantsing, you can think about it right to left, where the right is, you've got the answer. So why has someone done this? And that's the biggest question. Any book, when you're writing it, you should always ask yourself, it's not necessarily about the character, but why has someone killed someone? Why is someone trying to start a nuclear war between America and China? Or what's the sort of the motivation behind the villain? And what's their plan? And then it's kind of like, how do you reveal that? How do you get this sort of the front-facing narrative drive to meet up with the discovering the motive, and then once you've got those bits at least sort of concrete, a lot of the stuff falls out of that, because there's a conflict between what your protagonist hero wants and what your villain is trying to do, and all that comes out kind of naturally now, I find. Whereas before, when I was writing it was very messy. I've got 30 odd books now, and you learn a lot when you're going through editing with people, and you sort of pick up, there's no like one standard editorial process. It's everyone has their own little biases they bring to it, and their own little tips and tricks. And one of the things I'd like to do is use various editors at various points and pick up little techniques, little tricks, so that it speeds me up, so that I need less editing as I go. So that the it's maybe not the first draft, but it's about the sort of the first final product I've done. That's as close to finished as possible. So it's been, edited by myself to the same standards as another editor would have done, because I've learned a lot of the things they would be looking for. And it's kind of like designing those aspects in. So if like one of the main things you'll see in screenwriting books, for example, is that a scene should either show character or move the plot forward. And if it doesn't, cut it out. And an editor will say, this book doesn't move anything forward. Can you just get rid of it? So it's like making sure that when you're going through an outline, or even if you're pantsing it, when you're actually writing it, making sure that there's tension to it. Does this move the plot forward? Is there an obstacle to the character getting what they want? Is it clearly defined what the character wants in this scene? Or does it just show something about them, or ideally both? All that kind of stuff is trying to give myself a sort of, like, maybe not so much a pro forma, but a template that asks me all these standard questions that I've kind of, it becomes intuition and instinct as you're going through the outline. So a lot of it's practice, but a lot of it's like reading up on craft books as well to understand the best practices across other people's experiences. And then, anything that sort of tingles your spidey sense, putting that into your own process and making sure that every time you go through stuff, you're starting at the right point, or that making sure that any scenes that you've got in there should be in there, have to be in there, and they're essential to the story.
Everybody now wants your flowchart and your writing process engineering book. So I think you should definitely try and put that together at some point and come back and tell us about it. Because I mean, and I used to do a similar job in consulting, and swim lane diagrams, I think is probably what you're talking about, and the different roles and who would do what, and then you try and re-engineer that. But it's funny because I can't think of my writing in that way. But what I do is, as you say, with every scene, is I will see what the movement is. And I use that Robert McKee value shift, the plus or minus, or minus, or all of those types of things. So as you say, we all pick up our tips along the way and we apply them, and it doesn't matter whether you're a plotter or a pantser or whatever you do, you will find a way. But it sounds like you've got a really honed process, because you've written, as you said, over 30 books now, and you're still going. So I did want to ask, because one of the things with crime novels, of course, is that generally the crime is often the same. It's like someone's been murdered, and there really only are a certain number of ways to murder people and how people actually die. So the originality is never in the death, really. Rarely in the death. The originality is more about, as you say, the motivations of the characters and the development of the characters. So how do you do your research? How do you pick things up? Do you read a lot of true crime, or how do you get your ideas? Classic question.
Well, there's that shop in Camden, that sells author ideas. No,
I think they're out. I don't really read a lot of true crime or listen to a lot. But you're absolutely right. The thing is, there's not necessarily a lot of originality. And I've tried to do it a few times in the books, where I think the first one I published with Amazon's Thomas and Mercer book was called Snared, and it's now been re-edited and republished as Tooth and Claw. That was not a murder. That was domestic terrorism. So animal rights, but it was a missing person at the start. So it was very much a police procedural. And I think there wasn't even a murder until about 200 pages in. So that was like trying to do, right, how can I do a book that doesn't have a murder on page one? And just trying to do something interesting like that. I think a lot of it is I'll have like an idea for either like a character who seems interesting, and then you can get some motivations, and it's like what would push them to kill, or you get ideas about a theme. So that one about, like animal rights, terrorism, what would be the motivations for that? What kind of crimes would they commit to get into the papers or onto the telly to further their cause? And it's a lot of it just comes down to like thinking about the victim and the villain, like what would make someone push themselves to that extreme end. And then it's just a lot of osmosis, I think. So I listen to a lot of podcasts and current affairs, news, politics, video games and technology and stuff. And it's amazing the interesting stuff you pick up that just sort of sparks off some little sort of figment of, or sort of little, not figment, little idea that starts flowing out from there, and it makes you think, oh well, if I took that and I did that, and a lot of it's what ifs. What if someone like so and so was more like this and they did that, which isn't really very helpful, but that's usually the starting point. But one of the things I've been doing this year is a lot of idea development, because usually, I think you're talking about when you're talking about plotting and pantsing. Whenever I've tried either, I always have a bit of a mess around the third act, just as it's closing in. And it's always like, I haven't thought through this, I haven't thought through that. So what I've spent a lot of time this year on is refining my process so that I understand that motivation
And then it's kind of like, and then being able to bake it into the whole story as I go through it. And I think that would be the biggest piece of advice I would say. And simple stuff like the who, let's go, who, what, where, why, when, how. Answer those questions and you've got a pretty solid motivation for a book. And then you can, twist it a few times and you get something that's actually quite interesting, because sometimes the first idea you come up with is fairly vanilla, fairly plain. But then if you twist it and then twist it again, you get something that's kind of unique and cool that probably hopefully nobody's ever done before. And you can run wild with that.
Absolutely. And I think you mentioned what sparks your interest. And I think developing that curiosity is so important. And I feel like that's where, when I worked in the sort of IT and business process industry, I didn't have that. I didn't understand that spark of curiosity. I couldn't tap into it. And it takes practice to become aware of your personal radar as to what you are interested in, and then honestly do that. So one of mine is religious relics. I can't walk past a religious relic. I just love them. I'm so interested in them and I'm always reading about them. And so they turn up in a lot of my books. But it's like, I didn't really know that about myself. So do you find that curiosity is almost a muscle that you have to lean into and trust in some way?
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting one about, like, I think when you're growing up, you assume everyone's the same. And you sort of, as you grow up, you discover people are very different and you're very different. You have your own little sort of peculiarities. And, like you can't walk past a religious icon. I can't walk past a map. I'm absolutely fascinated by
I can't walk past
maps.
a map either.
Yeah, I absolutely love maps. And it's like, I should maybe write high fantasy so I can get maps put at the start of my books. But yeah, I think it's like, one of the things I never thought I was a people person, but as I worked, I really actually was, and like I got fascinated by the people I would meet and engage with. And when you're working in sort of financial services, you actually meet a lot of interesting characters, and that's for sure. Particularly banking, where I probably have met quite a lot of psychopaths, and I don't mean that flippantly. I mean genuinely, the sort of behaviour that you get from these people, it's quite staggering when you actually analyse. Because I've had incredibly difficult meetings. We go into an office in central London, and you just sit down and you've got to get something out of these guys to help with your part of a project, and they just sit down and go, "Why the F should I help you?" And that actually genuinely happened to me, and I still can't believe it. But there's a lot of just crazy people out there, and you know this yourself, that when you're working in that industry and you're flipping around between different companies or different parts of a company, you meet lots and lots and lots of people. If you meet hundreds and thousands of people, it's like you start to see fine gradations of people and lots of different personality types, and you sort of get them very instinctively. And a lot of the time when you're writing, when I'm writing, particularly the characters jump out of my head, because it's all sort of based on aspects of people I've met, not like sort of like friends or family, just like little bits of people, and you extrapolate that, which is a sort of really an unusual piece of psychoanalysis I've just done on myself. But
well, I've never been a people person, so I do things in quite a different way. But that's interesting about you. So I do want to ask you about marketing. Mm-hmm. You recently, I think it was recently or last year, you rebranded your series covers.
Yeah.
And obviously a series is so critical. Why did you do that? What was the need, and how important is that branding and cover design in crime selling, I guess?
Yeah. So I think a good cover is a pretty good starting point, because, predominantly when you're looking at, with the stuff I do, it's all on Amazon, whereas people who are wide, it's still on a digital platform. So you're looking at it on a screen, or whether it's a phone or a computer or a tablet or whatever. So it's like, that's the sort of the thing that people are seeing. And especially now, as more and more of the Amazon stuff is becoming very, not quite pay to play. I don't want to mean that disparagingly, but like there's a huge focus on the advertising, and the thing you're advertising isn't necessarily anything other than the book cover. When you look at the sponsored page at the section of a page on Amazon, it's the book cover, so it's got to be particularly eye catching. And I've always done my own covers for the self-published books, and they used to be pretty rubbish and amateur and stuff. And I think I just had a lot of practice now that I feel I can start to produce more professional looking ones, and start being able to do print ones, which look quite cool. And the reason I rebranded, I think it can be quite a good habit to get into. I think to just have a look. If you look at this, or even look at the trad publishing world, people like Ian Rankin, I've noticed a lot. Since I bought his books starting in like about 1998 going onwards, there's been about 4 or 5 different iterations of his covers. So they're always like they sort of move around different themes, but they're always kind of particularly reasonably similar. But they do like to refresh the backlist. And I think the sort of function of that, particularly in the digital age, is that you can look at a book cover and it'll just go, yeah, it doesn't look like it's for me. When the interior could be entirely up your street, but you are judging a book by the cover, which is a very true thing. But if you adjust the cover so that it's got a different image, or it's got different typography, or it's sort of brasher colors, or it's more monochrome, and it makes that person look again, then and they're seeing it, they're getting it presented to on Amazon, then it might be that you get more sales just because of that someone who's potentially passed by your book because they didn't like the look of the cover, they might have a little, oh, that looks quite interesting, and then not realizing they've already looked at it before. And it's also very easy to, it's trivially easy to upload a new file nowadays. The downside of it is you don't want to change the titles because you might confuse people, which I have done.
Yeah, I have also done, but you just have to say previously published as or whatever, and I mean, hope that it was long ago that people won't buy it. And of course you can't buy the same Kindle file twice, and it will tell you already bought this, so I don't worry too much about that. But what are any other ways that you have found successful in terms of marketing crime fiction?
I think the main thing now is all ads, really. And I think I had a sort of point at the start of last year where my sales were sort of kind of in the toilet. I hadn't had a book out for a wee while, I think, and so it was just kind of like I had that sort of dark night of the soul moment where I need to look at how to get this working. And I dabbled a bit in the sort of Facebook ads side of things and a bit of Amazon ads, and it was just really going hardcore on that and spending like I think a solid month, maybe even 6 weeks of just figuring out what on earth to do, reformatting all my books, recovering them, and just sort of, and then doubling the sales over that time, as well as kind of publishing some new stuff. But that it seems to be a lot of focuses on the marketing side now is definitely about being able to advertise on the various platforms. I've only really done Facebook and Amazon, and they've both got their own different functions I seem to find as I go through it. I'm not particularly great at it. I would say there's a lot of people out there who are much, much better than me, and you see their pages and their books being advertised against your own. But you do see return on it. And obviously, back in the day, it used to be you uploaded a book, got a few people to buy it, and then Amazon's algorithm would kick in and fire it around. I don't know if that's still necessarily the case, or just my vampire books spoiled my name with a lot of people on Amazon. I want
to read this vampire book now. Is it under Ed James?
It was. I think I unpublished it last year actually because it didn't sell any. It was just sitting there. You should
just chuck it up under another name.
I might do that. Yeah, I might
put an initial in it and stick it up. Why not? That's the thing. I feel like you talked earlier. You mentioned practice novels, and I don't even know if we're in that world anymore. Like I think there are so many varied types of books that people are put up onto Amazon Kindle, as you say. If you do your own covers and you can format things and you can just put something up under a different name, I think it's interesting. Personally, I'm up for your vampire novel, so I want to hear that. But we're coming towards the end of our time, but I did want to ask you about your publishing experience, because you've mentioned Thomas and Mercer, and then of course you've mentioned your self-publishing. So you mentioned all the rejections at the beginning, but what have been your choices through the actual publishing side, and what's changed?
Yeah, so I had a good run with Thomas and Mercer working as a hybrid thing. So I'd publish a book with them they sort of batched up the first 3 Fenchurch books, for instance, and that was a lot of getting 3 books together to then rapidly release, and that was a huge success that then led on to a lot of people discovering some other books, I think. And then, I think there's a lot with publishing houses, people faces change and stuff, and people move on. So I moved away from that and wanted to do a bit more, have a bit more control myself, and try other things. I've also, I've had books published by Headline and by Bookouture, and they've both been interesting experiences as well. It's interesting to see the different models that each of the publishers play. And I think the thing, I think when you're considering whether to sell a book to a publisher or to self-publish it yourself, is that you basically, when you sell a book, you're ceding all control pretty much of that book and you have to trust that that person you're selling it to is going to do their utmost to sell the book as well as you can, or better. And obviously there's a lot of people out there who've made huge sums of money from selling books to traditional publishers or digital publishers these days, but there's a lot of people who've had their fingers burnt and stuff. And I think that the thing with the self-publishing side is that I spend a lot of time on maintaining my backlist, which I don't think many publishers necessarily do. And it's, it's quite it's a good passive income. Obviously, you need to do a wee bit of work on the advertising side to get things in. But the stuff that Mark Dawson teaches on his course, that does work. If you've got like a book series, the funneling books through book 1 through 6, 7, 8 in the series, it does work, and it's lucrative if you can get it working. And that's the thing I would point to, is that if you're in control of your entire destiny with the publishing side of it, then you're going to give your all to make sure those books sell as well as they can. Whereas a publisher, they tend to stick to windows of about 3 months, and if it's not selling in that, then that's it. It's gone. You're not hot anymore. Whereas you're always going to be hot to yourself, I think. So,
not sure about that.
But you know what I mean? It's about focusing on, you give all your focus to all your babies that you've got out there. You want to give them all as much attention as possible and sell them as much as you can. Whereas a lot of publishers, they'll move on to the next big author. And it's the nature of the beast. And sometimes you're the big author and you're going to sell a gazillion pounds of books. But I think it's harder and harder to see if that's going to be you or not, or if you're just going to be something that's thrown at the wall and you just sort of dribble down the side.
Yeah, exactly. As they say, they might take 100 books in a year or something, and then one of them might stick or break out. And it is what's so difficult about the publishing industry, I think, is the reporting. I mean, it's the same in indie space, which is you hear about the big successes in traditional publishing, but you don't often hear about all the authors, of which there are many, who break up with their agent or get orphaned at a publisher or just get picked up and then nothing happens. Or you hear about the big success stories, but I think also a lot of people don't want to criticize their publisher, even if they're not being treated very well.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, there's a certain amount of it's professionalism that people will not do that. But yeah, you don't pick up a copy of the bookseller and see here's a list of all the authors who've been dropped this week.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about here's so and so's had a gazillion pound book deal, big on them, and here's their agent and they've done really well. But a lot of times when people can get these big deals, there's no guarantee of success as well, and it must be quite tough to be a debut author getting a big deal, but then
I don't know, one of those 7-figure deals would be fine.
Yeah.
But then just before we finish, I did want to ask you, because you talked there it was 2012, I think you said 2011, 2012 when you self-published the first book. I moved back to England in 2011, and in 2012 I think I went to London Book Fair for the first time, and I started to socialise more in the British scene as such, the British writer scene. I think I even came to Harrogate at a similar time, Harrogate Crime Festival, for people who are listening, and I very much felt there was a stigma in the UK around self-publishing, that it really still had this kind of negative view, and people treated me a bit like a curiosity, and I found that really hard. And I wonder how you think that, one, did you feel the same way back in 2012, and then have you seen things change?
I think you're totally right, and I don't think it has changed that much. I think if you look at the big festivals like Harrogate, Bloody Scotland, Capital Crime, etc., they don't tend to have a lot of indie authors or even digitally published authors like through Thomas and Mercer or Bookouture or whatever. I think there's definitely a stigma attached to not being with a big traditional publisher and having the weight of their publicity machine at it. Yeah, there's definitely, I think there's a sort of a snobbish element out there, but I think actually when you meet the other authors, they're all the ones who are traditionally published, they're always very interested. I don't know if you get that. They're very interested in, well, how do you find self-publishing and all that kind of stuff? Or, the indie mind.
Quietly interested.
Yes, quietly interested. They don't want their agent to see you talking to them. But it's maybe they sort of, I think they maybe see it as like a sort of a wee hobby they could have on the side, rather than actually the indie mindset, which I suppose is kind of different from self-publishing, where you are your own publisher and you're actually going to push yourself really far, whereas the self-publishing just feels a bit more, use the terminology, it feels a bit more hobbyist. So I think that's the impression I get, and I think a lot of them, I think the difficulty they see is actually, how do I get a cover done? How do I get someone to edit it? How do I upload it on Amazon? Which is all the easy stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the marketing that's the really tough stuff, and that's the bit that I don't think anyone really appreciates. And there's a lot of hard hours put into just mastering any of that kind of stuff.
Oh, well, then I should have met you back then. I think maybe I did, but I was probably like, because I'm such an introvert, I probably just didn't speak to anyone. I just stood in the corner. But no, that's fantastic. So where can people find you and your books online? Yeah,
so my books are all on Amazon. So I would suggest, I think the first Scott Cullen book is 79p. You can have a look at that. There's a Vicky Dodds book called Blood and Guts, which is free. There's another 3 in that series. And my website, which Joanna pointed out has not been updated in quite some time, is edjames.co.uk if you want to see some very outdated content.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for your time, Ed. That was great.
Thank you very much, Joanna.
So I hope you found the interview with Ed interesting and that it gave you some insights for your writing process and your publishing and marketing choices and even your book research. Ed talked about some of the things he did to reboot his author career, and you can find another interview on rebooting with Michael Brent Collings in episode 503 from last August, and that was super interesting too, so you can always go listen to that. So later this week, I've got an in-between-isode on co-creating with AI writing and image tools with Shane Neely. Shane has used AI text within his non-fiction book in separate sections rather than blending the output. So, he writes a couple of paragraphs and then he has this little text box with the AI commenting or saying something that he then uses to sort of riff off some more. It's quite a different approach. He's also used AI tools in a collaborative process to create images and poetry and just generally go back and forwards with this book, and has published a book on AI art and poetry, of AI art and poetry, which he's also released as NFTs, and we've talked about NFTs differently. So this is definitely a whole load of futurist stuff, and I say futurist, it's not futurist, is it, anymore? People are actually doing this, but I like talking to people who are doing interesting things, so that is coming up as an in-between-isode. Then on next Monday's show, I'll be talking about gentle book marketing with Sarah Santacroce, which, let's face it, many of us would prefer to market in a gentle way. So happy writing, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. You might also like the backlist episodes and show notes, available at thecreativepenn.com/podcast. You can also get your free author blueprint at thecreativepenn.com/blueprint. If you'd like to connect, you can tweet me at The Creative Penn or find me on Facebook at The Creative Penn. See you next time.